Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So in this video, we are going to learn how to program LLMs to give structured outputs. So let's say you're building an application and that application requires some use of LLMs or generative AI, and you want the LLM to give you response in a JSON format. So one thing you can do is you can add a system prompt, for example, and let's say you say here, give output in JSON format, and a user, let's say it says hi. Now, the LLM might give you a valid JSON or it might not. That is unpredictable. So let's try this once. So we'll have a response, and in that we'll use the chat completions API. And in this, we'll use GPT-4o mini model. And inside the messages array, we'll have a system prompt which will say give output in JSON, and we'll have a role user message, and let's say the user says hi, and we'll print the response. So we'll have choices, we'll have one choice, and inside the message we'll get the content. So let's try to run this. Yeah, so you can see the LLM, it's giving you a response in JSON, but you can see there are some extra text here. So this basically is markup text. Okay, so this is a markup language which we use in README files in GitHub, for example. So if we put this in a markup preview, you can see this is how it's rendered in markup. So this is giving you a markup text. So the solution for this is that instead of giving a system prompt which instructs the LLM to give a JSON format response, what we can do is we can remove the system prompt, and the chat completions API, it provides us a property called response format, which we can set. And inside that property, we can set the type of response to be a JSON object. So what this will ensure is that this will ensure that all the JSON that the LLM outputs, all the response that the LLM outputs is a valid JSON. Okay, so let's try this. So we'll remove the system prompt and we'll say a response format of type to be a JSON object. And let's run this. Okay, so it gives us an error and it says the messages. So this messages array must contain the word JSON in some form. So now you might wonder, we still need to provide the LLM the instructions to output JSON, right? So what's the use of this JSON object property? Okay, so the use of this is that all the response that we get from this API call will always be a valid JSON. So we can parse it and we can use that in our application. Okay, so let's change our prompt to say JSON list of two countries and their capital. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so you can see the output is a valid JSON, and it will always ensure that we can parse it. Okay, so let's try that. We'll import the JSON package in Python, and we'll parse it, and we'll say data, set it to the data variable, and we'll loop through this countries array. Okay, so for country in data countries, we'll print the name and the capital. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so now you can see we can parse this JSON and we can use that in our applications. Now, one thing to note is that all the response that we get from the LLM will always have a object at the root level. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So we can have a JSON which will have an object at the root level, or it can have an array at the root level. Okay, so it's not recommended in JSON to have an array at the root level, although this is a valid JSON, but our LLM, the OpenAI's API, will never output a JSON like this. Okay, it will always output a JSON with a object at the root level. So this is the one thing to note. And the second thing is that although the output of this is a valid JSON which we can parse, but we don't know what keys and properties this LLM is outputting. Okay, so we don't know this will be a countries array. It may be a capitals array. We don't know this is a country key or this capital key, or we might want the LLM to output the JSON in a certain format. So we might want it to output something like this. So what we can do is we can maybe instruct the LLM to output with capitals key as the array, and a key value for the country name and the capital. So we can instruct that. So let's say what we do is output the list as a key capitals, and inside that each object must have the key must have country name as the key and capital as the value. Okay, so let's run that and we'll remove this uh, for loop. So let's just see what it outputs first. And okay, all right. So it's still not output the same thing that we want. So it's assuming the country as the key and the capital as the value. So we do not want that. So let's try to change it. Inside the object must have country name inside a property called key and capital inside the property called value. Okay, so let's run this. Yeah, so now it outputs the JSON that we want, but it's still not guaranteed that it will always output something like this. Okay, so we can't guarantee that the output will always remain like this. So the solution to solve this is using JSON schema. So we can define how our JSON should look like using something called JSON schema. So we have our actual JSON, which is called a JSON instance. So this is the actual JSON object, and we have JSON schema, which defines how the actual JSON should look like. Okay, so this is how our JSON is, and this defines how our JSON should look like. So what we can do is we have this JSON. This is the exact JSON that we wanted our LLM to output, and this is the schema for that JSON. So let me explain this. Okay, so at the root level we have an object. Okay, so this is of type object. So as I mentioned, our root level of the JSON should always be an object. Okay, so at the root level we have a type of object. Okay, and for this root level object we have properties. Okay, so we have properties, and one of the property is capitals. Okay, now this capital should be of type array. Okay, that is what we have defined. It should be of type array, and we have a title and a description. So this is for LLM to know what this key actually represents. Okay, so this capitals key represent it. It has a title of countries and capitals, and the description is list of countries and capitals. Okay, so this is for LLM to know what this key actually represents. And since this is a JSON array, we have items inside each. We have item inside this capital. So each of the item inside this array should look like this. Okay, so each of the item should be of type object. Each of the item of the capitals array should be of type object. As you can see, each of the item is of type object, and each object should have a property called key and a value. Okay, each object should have a property of type of key and a value, and this key should be of type string. Okay, so this key should be of type string, and it has a title which is country, so the key should be country, and description is the name of the country. Okay, so this is for LLM again to know what this key represent, and this value is again of type string. So this value of Paris should be of type string, and it has a title and a description. Okay, and at the end we have something called required. Okay, so this item, each of the items of this array has a required property. Okay, so this key and a value is required. So LLM can't create JSON without these two keys and values. Okay, so if we remove this, it might contain JSON without the key and the value. And at the last we have the required property for this root object. So this required property says that the capital must be present. You can't have JSON without this capitals key. Okay, so let me create this JSON in code. Okay, so we'll have a schema object, and inside the schema object we'll have a type of object. So the root level object should be of type object, and it should have properties. Okay, properties, and the property should be capital, and it should be of type array. Okay, and it must have items which is of type object, and each object should have properties of type key, which should be of type string, and value should be of type string. Okay, and we need to make a required field. So this required must be key and value, and here required must be capitals. Okay, and we also need to define a title. The title is list of countries, or let's just say countries capitals, and description must be list of countries and their capital, and a title for the key. It should be the country, and the description is name of the country. And again, the title is capital and description is capital of the country. Okay, so this is a JSON that we have, JSON schema that we have created for our output, the output that we want. And now to pass this into our API, so this is how we do it. In the response format, we set the type to a JSON schema. Okay, so last time we had set this to a JSON object. This time it should be JSON schema, and inside that we must have a JSON schema key, and we must name the JSON schema something. So in this case we named it capitals, and we have a schema key which should contain all this schema. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so we'll remove this instruction to make sure the output is because of our schema and not because of the prompt. Okay, so the JSON list of two countries and their capitals. Okay, and it should be JSON schema, and the schema, uh, the JSON schema must have a name, and let's name this capitals, and the schema must be a schema. Okay, all right, so now let's run this and see if we get the correct output. All right, yeah, so you can see we have a correct JSON output, and we have a capitals array, and inside that each object has a key, or has the country name as the key and the capital as the value. Okay, so we can even parse this using JSON. So data is equal to JSON dot loads, and we can loop through the for capital in data capitals. We can print the country as the capital key and the capital as the value. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so as you can see, we can output the country name and the capital. So this will ensure that the output JSON will always be of this kind of format. So creating these kinds of schemas is very time consuming. Okay, so as you can see, for this very simple uh, response that we want from the LLM, the schema is very large. Okay, so what we can do is, instead of creating a schema on our own, we can use a library called Pydantic. Okay, so there's a library called Pydantic which we can install, and this library allows us to define our objects in terms of Python classes, and all those classes will be directly converted to JSON schemas. So we don't have to do all of that for on our own. Okay, so let me show you. We can remove this schema object, schema variable, and we can import from Pydantic. We can import base model, and we can create a class called countries. Okay, so in our example we'll have two classes. One is called country, and this will have property called key and value, and these two must be of type string, and we have a description for both of these. And we will also have a class called countries, which will have a countries property, and it must be of type list of countries. Okay, and it has a description. Okay, so we can have a country, and it will inherit from the base model, and it will have a key of type string and a value also of type string. Okay, and we'll have a countries class which will also inherit from base model, and it will have a capitals property which will be a list of country. Okay, And we can also give description to both of these keys using something called annotated. So from typing, we'll import annotated, and this will allow us to give a description. Okay, so this will be the type of the key, and this will be the description of the key. Okay, same for value, right? So capital name, country name, and we can also define a description here. All right. Okay. So this creating this kind of classes is very easier in Python than creating that schema. Okay. So we can use a feature in our OpenAI's SDK, and it's in beta right now. So we need to use the dot this beta object, and inside that we'll have a chat completions, and instead of calling the create function, we have a something called parse function. Okay, and inside this we don't need to provide all of this object. We can directly pass the countries class here, and it will take care of all of this. Okay, so we don't even need to do the json.load function here. Okay, so what we can do is I'll print two values here. So one is our normal content key, and other is I'll print the response dot choices 0 message, and there's also a key called parsed. Okay, so this will automatically parse this JSON in this form. Okay, so let's run this. So you can see we have the plain JSON, which is the content key in our response, and we have a parsed JSON. This is a Python object, which is the parsed key in our response. Okay, so we don't even need to call this loads function here, so we can remove this, and we can use the parsed function and remove these brackets. Okay, and since this is a Python object, but instead of using this dictionary kind of keys, we can directly do dot capitals and dot key and dot value. Okay, yeah, so let's run this. Yeah, so you can see we have the same response from the LLM, and this time it makes our job a lot easier by using this Pydantic based model in the typings. So this is how you instruct LLMs to give you outputs in a structured format. And that's it for today, guys. Like the video and do subscribe to the channel.